everyone. Welcome to this last media training session, the third one that will be on the pandemic, drivers of risk, enemies of development. What have we learned, or if we still need to learn about the COVID-19 pandemic? This is going to be the last training session that we hold during this seventh platform for the seven regional platform for disaster risk reduction, and in the Americas and the Caribbean. And we are not having interpretation today, so we are very sorry about this, and we will be doing improvising the translation during this session. Hola, buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos. Esta es la última sesión de capacitación que vamos a tener en el tema de impulsores del riesgo, enemigos del desarrollo, qué es lo que podemos aprender del COVID-19, del COVID-19, las lecciones de lo que sabemos y lo que tenemos que aprender. Para eso, en esta sesión va a estar con nosotros el doctor David Smith. Él es director del Centro de Manejo del Medio Ambiente y también coordinador del Instituto para Desarrollo Sostenible de la Universidad de West Indies. Today we are going to be joined by Dr. David Smith, which is Director for the Center for the Environmental Management and Coordinator for the Institute for Sustainable Development. He's going to do his presentation and we'll be doing some sum up of his presentation and translation for the people that don't understand English. Thank you very much, Dr. Smith, for joining us in this very last minute training session that we hope is going to be a very interesting one. What will be the role of the the University of West Indies in disaster risk reduction in Jamaica? That I understand is a quite important one. If you can give us an insight on that, it will be very much appreciated.
Patricia, and thank you to everybody for their time, and a good afternoon to everybody, and I think possibly a good morning to people in Central America. The University of the West Indies has been involved in researching disaster risk for many years. Our campuses are found throughout the islands of the Caribbean, and so we have become very used to hurricanes, droughts, and also other disasters such as earthquakes and also health disasters as well. I'll stop there for a second while you translate.
El doctor David Smith dice que la Universidad de West Indies está cerca de una zona en las islas que está muy expuesta tanto a huracanes como sequías como otro tipo de desastres, y esto ha hecho que ellos tengan una gran experiencia a la hora de manejar este tipo de temas.
So one of our important studies has to do with seismicity or earthquakes and volcanoes. There is a research center that is dedicated to earthquakes and volcanoes, but we also strongly work with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and they deal with a lot of climate-related phenomena such as droughts and hurricanes. And we have people studying floods and landslides in the different campuses of the university. And we have campuses in Jamaica, Barbados, we have a campus in Trinidad, we have a new campus in Antigua and Barbuda. And so there are many people studying hazards as well as how those hazards affect our societies and our economies, and providing advice to governments and to people and communities on how best to deal with the things that affect us.
Okay, Dr. Smith, we have a change of plan because my colleague Luis, which is in the background, helping us, is telling me that there is interpretation. So everything has been interpreted. So we can go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so when we study these different phenomena for the Caribbean, what do we find? One of the things that we find is that no Caribbean island is safe from all the different hazards, and all our Caribbean islands suffer from many different hazards. So it's not just hurricanes. Most of the capital cities in the Caribbean have been destroyed by an earthquake at some point in their history. So in addition to all the things that are worrying us now, we have a series of different hazards, and we therefore need to look at what allows us to work with those hazards and what allows us to work through them and to recover. So we must be concerned about several different barriers which stand in our way. One is waste. We have to be also concerned about inequality. We must also be concerned about climate change and also loss of biodiversity, because all of these affect our ability as societies to bounce back after an event. If there is inequality, what will happen is that after an event, the people who are better off will continue to be better off and may even recover faster, but the people who are not doing as well may suffer losses that they do not recover from. And we know from studies that repeated hazards increases inequality. In the southern United States, for example, the gap between not just rich and poor, but the gap between people of different races increases because of numerous tropical storms and cyclones hitting the areas of the southern United States. In the Caribbean, we also have to be concerned about our economics. Many of our countries have very small individual markets and a very high dependence on a single product, that is beach tourism. And so they're very, very vulnerable, particularly to hazards such as hurricanes, which can damage the coastal environment a great deal. So what, knowing this, do we have to decide and learn about COVID and COVID-19? COVID is a pandemic, but it is not the only pandemic that we should be concerned about. The World Health Organization is currently tracking 19 pandemics. About half of these are zoonoses, or diseases which are transmitted by animals. It's likely that climate change will affect vector-borne diseases, that is, diseases such as malaria, which are carried by animals, and those animals infect one human being after another. So some of our vector-borne diseases will increase and some will decrease. If we continue to damage forest and to cut down forest and go into areas which are previously wild, we will increase our encounters with new pathogens, new disease-causing organisms. Also, when we're thinking about what should we learn from COVID, let us not forget that in our region we also experience Zika and chikungunya, and we should hopefully have learned lessons from Zika and chikungunya, and we must apply those lessons to everything that happens in the future. So we need to understand how we manage to bounce back from Zika and chikungunya, and if we did not bounce back from Zika and chikungunya very well, we must identify those lessons and apply them to COVID-19 and also to the next pandemic when it comes along, and to the next hurricane, and to the next earthquake, and to the next volcano. One of the things that we should be very concerned about has to do with information and the way in which we share information and the way in which we spread information. And here is a very important role for the media. The media are still very much a good and important source of information for many people, even though there are a large number of our populations that get their information from social media. So it's very important for our mainstream media to be seen as authoritative and a good source of expertise, because often what is read in social media is not good information. We also need to be sure that experts are able to get good access to the media and that their views and their evidence is faithfully transmitted so people can be fully informed. It's also, I think, a very important and useful habit to make sure that the source of information, wherever that information is coming from, whether it be, for example, the regional Caribbean organization that deals with public health, CARFA, or from a government source, or from a doctor, or a lawyer, or a politician, it's very, very important to make sure people understand clearly where the information is coming from. The public understanding of science is, in many parts of the Caribbean, not as good as we would like it to be. And that means that in terms of the way that people are dealing with the pandemic, there are areas where there needs to be improvement. Also, we have to bear in mind that not all our leaders understand or accept the science and the evidence that has to do with disasters or that has to do with the pandemic in particular. If we think, for example, of, I'm going to say, Motley, Merkel, Ardern, Bolsonaro, and Trump, the way in which those leaders dealt with the information about the pandemic varied from one to the next. And we can see clearly in some of those countries that they did very, very well because their leader understood the evidence and based policies on scientific evidence, where there are other countries where they are doing fairly badly, even though it's the same hazard, because the leaders did not accept the scientific evidence and build policies on that scientific evidence. As a result, if you look worldwide, the number of deaths per capita, the number of deaths absolutely, is not tied into the size of the country. It's tied in very much to the actions of the country. So, for example, the United States of America has disproportionately more deaths than it should do if it was being affected in exactly the same way as, say, Germany. Similarly, Brazil has way more deaths and cases of COVID than you would expect simply based on its population size. So, what the impact of the disasters on the economy of developing countries and small islands in particular? Something like COVID exposes systemic weaknesses. It exposes weaknesses in the economy. It exposes the fact that most of our economy is based only on one type of activity or one particular activity. It increases inequality, as I said before, because winners tend to continue to win and losers fall further behind. It increases the pressure to migrate. And in the situation of Latin America and the Caribbean, this puts a lot of pressure of people wanting to migrate, particularly to the United States, but also to neighboring countries. And what we also find is that the indicators that we use to measure economic activities sometimes reflect a false situation, because if you are rebuilding after a disaster, then that contributes to economic activity. Now, in the case of COVID, what we've seen is a reduction, a very big reduction in economic activity because of lockdowns and because of curfews and so on and so forth. And we have also seen a great drop in economic activity because COVID has affected travel, and that, of course, affects tourism a great deal. What are the lessons that we have to learn? One of the lessons we have to learn is, unfortunately, that our economies need to be broader and more varied. We may also need to understand more the role of cooperation in, for example, common markets or common economic spaces that could happen if we cooperate with each other to increase those markets. So the role of something like a CARICOM, where the Caribbean markets of a small country, say like Antigua, can be increased because it can start working with other countries. But those kinds of things are not going to work if we spend all our time just doing one particular economic activity that is highly vulnerable. So we're going to have to fix that. We're definitely going to have to broaden the kinds of things that we do.
Thank you very much, Dr. David, for your exposition. It was very interesting, bringing up very important topics as the need for the media to go to science-based information, to check the information that they do deliver when there is a disaster. And also very important what you mentioned about the COVID pandemics and all the nightmare around figures, because we all got the figures wrong. We were giving general figures within putting them into context and giving figures of similar figures for the countries with different population, and that make a very, very strange picture of what was really going on. So it really was confusing for the whole society to understand what was going on in different countries. And also thank you very much for bringing everything around the cause of disasters in developing economies. We are not going to have another speaker joining us, and we will be taking questions. I know that there are some questions from the public that have already arrived via the QA, and I invite everyone to have the questions put there, the questions that they want to ask to our two experts today, and then we will be having at the end of the session a special Q&A section where we will be replying to your questions. And now we are joined. Now we have with us Dr. Raimundo Padilla, who has a degree in journalism and literature. He's doctor in history and anthropology for the TSAs from the Mexico capital city. He's a member of the system of national researchers. He's an academic with lots of different studies, history studies, books, documentaries, and chapters on everything that has to do with disaster risk reduction and journalism. He's a teacher in the University of Colima in Mexico, and he teaches subjects such as the security of journalists when they are working in the middle of a disaster, and many other topics. And he's going to talk us today in Spanish, but I think you are going to have translation in English too about this, from his perspective on his study on the COVID-19 pandemics and how the Latin American media cover it and could improve his coverage of the pandemic. Of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Raimundo, and over to you. Raimundo, te paso el micrófono para que nos cuentes sobre tu estudio en los temas de el COVID y cómo puede mejorarse la cobertura en los medios en Latinoamérica. Gracias.
Hola, ¿qué tal, Patricia? Muy buenas tardes. Primeramente, pues quiero agradecer a todo el equipo de UNDR que ha hecho posible este evento tan interesante con la participación del Dr. Smith, esta séptima plataforma regional para la reducción de riesgos de desastres en las Américas y el Caribe. Ha resultado ser sumamente interesante para poner en diálogo las distintas perspectivas entre los periodistas de diferentes latitudes. Y de verdad me siento muy honrado con esta invitación y ojalá que algunas de las ideas puedan servir a lo mejor como detonantes de acciones específicas por parte de colegas que nos están siguiendo en Latinoamérica y en otros lugares del mundo y que como su servidor se dedican al periodismo, entre otras actividades en este contexto de la pandemia. Pues bueno, mi apreciación de verdad que con relación a lo poco que se ha podido acceder al conocimiento a través de papers en revistas arbitradas, especializadas en periodismo y comunicación, pues solamente es muy poco lo que se está produciendo todavía en el área específica de la comunicación y el periodismo. Sin embargo, hay otras áreas, obviamente la medicina, obviamente la atención y la respuesta, que tienen muchas publicaciones especializadas en este contexto. Eso es una situación muy preocupante porque entonces nos damos cuenta que las publicaciones especializadas en comunicación o periodismo están atendiendo muy poco la labor que realizan los periodistas en el mundo y en Latinoamérica con relación al contexto pandémico. ¿Qué es posible identificar? Como antropólogo, me parece que también es muy importante poner atención en las prácticas que realizan los periodistas en este contexto pandémico. Es obvio que son muy vulnerables ante esta amenaza que estamos padeciendo como sociedad, pero en ciertas actividades profesionales es más vulnerable la situación. Y creo que una de las labores profesionales más vulnerables en el contexto de pandemia es el periodismo, porque está condicionado al trabajo de campo, a estar en las calles, en las oficinas, en el contacto con muchas autoridades para obtener información. Sin embargo, pues está determinada esa vulnerabilidad en función del contexto específico en el que se desarrolla el periodista o en el que labora el periodista. ¿Qué significa esto? Pues que algunos periodistas cuentan con un amplio respaldo por parte de sus empresas porque son empresas importantes, mientras la mayoría pues son marginales y tienen que responder con base en sus propias prácticas, en su ingenio social para poder dar continuidad a su labor informativa ante la sociedad. Me parece que lo más importante de la labor en este momento es transmitir información de calidad a la sociedad. Sin embargo, está determinado por estas circunstancias que estoy mencionando, en donde no es posible corroborar la información plenamente, incluso de manera visual, como acostumbramos a hacerlo en el periodismo. No es posible atestiguar todo lo que está sucediendo y tenemos que depender de la información que nos aportan las autoridades. No es posible estar en los lugares para constatar cómo se están realizando labores, por ejemplo, en el manejo de muertes masivas y de gran número de cadáveres que tengan un trato adecuado, digno, ¿sí? como humanos. Entonces, ese tipo de actividades resultan muy complejas porque no todos los periodistas cuentan con el equipamiento adecuado también para asistir a estos lugares. Entonces, la parte práctica es problemática. ¿Cómo lo están resolviendo? Hay muchísima creatividad. Hemos vuelto a esos escenarios del cuarto donde se improvisaba, se colocaba una sábana de fondo, una luz intensa y se transmitía desde ahí con lo que eso implica. Pero también es preocupante lo que está ocurriendo por parte de las instituciones. De manera muy frecuente se insiste en que la sociedad debe poner atención a la información oficial de las instituciones y de sus representantes. Pero ¿qué ocurre cuando los representantes de las instituciones emiten información equívoca, imprecisa, tergiversada o en este contexto de posverdad, donde se intenta sostener una versión alterna conveniente a un sistema político o a un sistema de gobierno? Y el periodista no tiene la posibilidad de corroborar toda esa información que está recibiendo por parte de las autoridades y debe transmitirla a la sociedad aún con incertidumbre, porque es información oficial, es respaldada por una institución. En particular, en México realizamos un ejercicio muy específico para analizar las conferencias del equipo principal de respuesta ante la pandemia por la COVID-19 encabezado por el doctor Hugo López-Gatell, y su ejercicio de una conferencia cada día por las tardes, todos los días. Entonces, analizamos cada una de las conferencias completas durante un año para identificar el uso de los conceptos propios de la gestión integral de riesgos de desastre en las conferencias. Nos dimos cuenta de manera muy sorpresiva que hay conceptos que parecen deliberadamente ser excluidos de ese discurso. Por ejemplo, desastre. En su lugar se utilizan seudónimos o eufemismos como crisis sanitaria, emergencia, ¿sí? Muerte incluso, pero sin mucha precisión en el uso del concepto, pero se omite deliberadamente caracterizar la situación que padecemos todos como desastre. Y lo que tenemos frente a nosotros es un gran desastre, el peor desastre en la historia de la humanidad reciente. Y tenemos que comprenderlo así con todas sus variables. Hay numerosas pérdidas económicas, millones de personas afectadas, millones de personas muertas, un retroceso en mucho del desarrollo en distintas sociedades. Todo eso caracteriza un desastre. También es importante entender que en este discurso institucional hay una gran cantidad de periodistas que acuden a obtener la información. Y quienes están escuchando la información deben transmitir casi literalmente lo que se les está informando. Pero si no podemos comprender o no se emiten de manera precisa los conceptos por parte de las instituciones, conceptos como vulnerabilidad, resiliencia, respuesta, amenaza, riesgo, ¿sí? Si no están siendo utilizados de manera adecuada por la autoridad, el periodista también entiende esta información de manera diferente, ¿sí? Porque el periodista se está formando con la comprensión de conceptos específicos en el marco de la gestión integral de riesgos de desastre, pero la autoridad no los usa. Entonces, la autoridad está en un canal emitiendo información en un sentido, el periodista está comprendiendo la información en otro sentido y la transmite a la sociedad, que evidentemente también filtra esa información y la reinterpreta, de tal forma que tenemos lo que en México llamamos un teléfono descompuesto, donde una cosa es lo que dice la autoridad, otra cosa es cómo se interpreta por parte del periodista y otra es la forma en cómo lo entiende la sociedad. En parte eso es lo que ha generado tanta desinformación en Latinoamérica y en otros países, porque la sociedad no comprende con precisión qué es lo que se le está tratando de informar y qué tiene que hacer con precisión y cuáles son las medidas adecuadas. En un momento la amenaza parece ser el virus, en otro momento la amenaza parece ser la propia sociedad y el contacto que tiene. En otro momento la amenaza parece ser solamente un grupo de personas que no se vacunan. En otro momento la amenaza puede ser la propia vacuna por tanta información tergiversada que se ofrece. Y obviamente cuando la sociedad deja de entender y deja de atender y de comprender lo que están emitiendo sus autoridades, la sociedad pone su atención a la demás información que circula principalmente a través de las redes sociales. Y así vemos cómo se ha generado este fenómeno muy importante en esta pandemia de la infodemia, donde las redes sociales han avanzado mucho más en la divulgación de información tergiversada, equívoca, más allá que la información oficial de las instituciones. Es preocupante la situación, pero nos aporta un gran cúmulo de experiencias para poder comprender un escenario similar en el futuro que esperamos que no sea muy pronto.
Thank you very much, Rai, for raising all the issues. You are right, but we are seeing lots of companies and special news agents that set up systems or services And I think as a result of what you say, the misinformation that we suffer in the pandemics, we also see lots of new initiatives, sometimes private, by all the news agencies, big news agencies like l'Agence France Presse, AFP, or l'Agence Associated Press, also has like fact-checking services that have been that have been created or reinforced during the pandemic just to verify the information. So it's true what you say, but I think there is also another side of it that fact-checking is becoming mainstream now, and it's becoming much more important, and we are much more aware in society that the information that we get from the social media can be not always the real one. So there's a bad side to it, but also a good side to it. And now we are running out of time, but I would like to take a couple of questions that arrived a while ago from the audience, and that are addressed to Dr. Smith. The first one, which is, what framework can the Caribbean put in place facing these new pandemics? Dr. David, Dr. Smith, you could answer this question from our colleague journalists in the audience. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we need to strengthen what's already there. We already have organizations that deal with health and deal with health emergencies. We need to make sure that they are given all the resources they need so we can deal with this together. But we also need to make sure that we cooperate with other parts of the Caribbean, even if they don't speak the same language we do. Cuba is doing some very good work and has produced a vaccine which is going through the process of being approved. We need to cooperate with our near neighbors and don't think that everything has to come necessarily from outside the region.
Thank you, Dr. David. We have another question that also got a while ago. Should society now require elected leaders to declare their understanding and knowledge of climate change and future pandemics? I think this could be answered by either Dr. Smith or Dr. Padilla. Both of you could answer this question, whether we need leaders to declare their knowledge of climate change or pandemics, or as a way to be elected, I guess.
Yes. If a leader gets up before an election and says they don't believe in climate change or they don't accept it, then you shouldn't vote for them.
Dr. Padilla, I think we have one for you. ¿Qué hacer cuando las fuentes oficiales dan cifras que estimulan a la población a exponerse al contagio en los distintos eventos y actividades, dando un falso sentimiento de seguridad? Un poco lo que usted ya mencionaba de qué hacer cuando las fuentes oficiales no dan la mejor información, ¿no? ¿Qué recomendaría en ese caso?
Bueno, yo creo que es importante hacer la precisión en esta pregunta si se trata de una fuente local, la que está emitiendo la información, una fuente nacional o una fuente internacional. Si la fuente local está emitiendo información equívoca, hay que poner atención a lo que dicen las autoridades federales y nacionales con relación a ese tema. Pero si la información equívoca viene de las autoridades nacionales, debemos poner atención a las autoridades internacionales y lo que dicen con relación al tema. Sabemos que a nivel nacional y local hay un interés económico, pero sobre todo político, en el manejo de todo desastre y en particular con esta pandemia. Por eso tenemos que creer en las autoridades internacionales, en su imparcialidad y en su profesionalismo para emitir información de calidad para la sociedad.
I think we are going to take just the last question with this, and either of you could answer. I mean, I leave it to you. When politicized and potentially compromised data is the chief data source of local public pandemic policy, how does the media introduce outside that data in the face of the fight against fake news? Dr. Smith, I don't know if you would like to answer this, and then we take Dr. Padilla and we close.
I think it's very important that the media, especially mainstream, should help people to understand where good information comes from. You guys as journalists know how to figure out what is right and what is wrong, and using sites like the World Health Organization, the Oxford University, and others that have good data is absolutely vital, and you should let everybody know where that data comes from. I think that's very, very important, especially when you're also putting your information out on social media.
Dr. Padilla, what is your view on this?
Perdón, ¿me puedes repetir la pregunta?
Sí. Cuando los datos están politizados y la fuente principal de información de la pandemia en las autoridades locales, como mencionaste antes, están politizadas y dan datos que no son 100% fiables, ¿cómo hacen los medios para introducir estos datos y a la vez luchar contra las noticias falsas? Es un poco en la línea de lo que ya mencionabas antes.
Claro, hay que recordar que los periodistas tenemos distintas técnicas para poner en valor, en una balanza, la información que emite una fuente. Una de las técnicas más prácticas y más comunes es triangular la información, buscar otras fuentes que puedan corroborar esos datos, ya sea de manera documental, de manera oral o de algún otro formato. Pero nosotros tenemos la responsabilidad social de contrastar los datos que nos da una fuente con los que emite otra. Si la fuente principal es la autoridad política, existen muchos especialistas científicos, académicos que pueden ayudarnos a comprender mejor lo que se está diciendo, incluso las estadísticas, a leerlas mejor y no quedarnos solamente con la perspectiva política que se está transmitiendo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Padilla and Dr. Smith. It was a pleasure to have you both here. We're really pleased to have all your knowledge with us. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for answering the questions. I think it's been really relevant, the information that you gave to journalists. I will also recommend from my experience to have your own experts that you go to frequently, the ones that you really trust, and always double check with them, because I mean we cannot be enough to emphasize the need to distribute important, real, accurate information in the pandemic sign and before, and now in the climate change era too is becoming really important. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for the audience for their questions that were really interesting and brought up a really interesting debate. I would like just to remind everyone that tomorrow we will have a press conference, a closing press conference to deliver the results of this 4 days discussion and the conclusions of the ministerial meeting that is taking place right now. So we will have real breaking news about what's going to happen in the region to become more resilient in the next years to come, and what we can do to face the challenges that we face as society and also possible new pandemics. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you all tomorrow in the press conference. Bye.